Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the 9th episode, Logic Models. Again, hi, I'm Beth Malkus Staffa, and today I will be presenting with Deborah Seltzer and Dr. Sandra Ortega.
Most of us have been talking about logic models for years, so we are all pretty familiar with logic models and how to develop them, right?
A logic model is basically your map or visual plan of how you and your stakeholders expect your PPPs to ultimately work in advancing the outcomes or changes identified in the NARA.
As some of you already know, we have an entire section on logic models in the Empowerment Evaluation Toolkit. We encourage you to use that Empowerment Evaluation Toolkit alongside this episode to help you get comfortable with logic models.
So let's dig into one of my favorite topics, logic models, how to do them and what do they really mean. The learning objectives show the links between the RPE national, state, and local logic models, discuss the community level PPPs or the 3 Ps as Megan Crouch from Safe on Main likes to call them, and provide some guidance for you all to fine-tune your logic models so they align with your community level 3 Ps and the associated outcomes.
So everyone should have their current logic models to look at as we talk?
Yes, please have your current local logic model handy. And know, as we said in the past, that logic models change as we learn more through implementing our program and as community context changes. Pause the recording if you don't have a copy of yours.
We know that 2020 was a complete game changer for so many of us, and so we get that the logic models will be updated according to the new environments we need to navigate. Logic models are what I call the maps to how we think our program implementation will work towards achieving our outcomes. But as any of us who have taken a road trip know, sometimes circumstances change and we have to change our plans. Think of the logic models the same way. They are your intended map, but they may also change as we navigate the circumstances that make up our if-then statements.
You may have recognized this slide from CQI 7. In an ideal world, you and your stakeholders have completed your NARA and have created a NARA story to share with your community. But we recognize this isn't always the case.
However you got there, at this point, we do expect that you and your stakeholders have selected the risk and protective factors you are planning to impact and have identified your planned PPP. These are what you need to have selected in order to create a logic model.
And you should have some idea of what success will look like in your community if the PPPs implemented work according to your belief. This idea will inform your evaluation plan, which is also in your logic model.
At this point, you and your stakeholders will need to create a written report of your results. This report will be the foundation for selection of the PPPs and creating an action plan or logic model. As part of this report, you should talk about the NARA process and what was discovered during the process.
You should also talk about the sorting process and what were the criteria for prioritizing one area of need over another, or one risk factor over another risk factor.
At this point of the NARA story, or report will begin to identify potential PPPs. Remember, we talked about the PPPs and choosing the PPPs in previous CQI episodes. And don't worry if you're not an expert in writing logic models. This episode will help, and we will be providing technical assistance.
Your NARA report will also help you identify ways to measure your future success. How will you know if you are successful in achieving the outcomes? Who can help you with monitoring and measuring your results? This too will be important information in your logic model. Remember, evaluation closes the loop in the CQI model.
We also want to acknowledge that putting together a logic model may be stressful for some. It is okay to put it down and come back to it.
Creating a logic model with your stakeholders is important, and it also helps you take some of the stress off your shoulders. One of your stakeholders might be an expert and love doing them. Another might love writing outcome statements, and another might be good at keeping everyone focused on the big picture and pulling people back from a rabbit hole of needing more research.
It is also helpful to remember your logic model is a formal way of showing how to get from point A to point B. As in this picture, the bridge is leading us over the water towards the island.
One of the handouts for this episode is the Logic Model Friend or Foe quiz. For some of you, it might seem familiar. We have shared it before, and it's part of the Empowerment Evaluation Toolkit found on ODVN's website.
Now would be a good time to pull out that little quiz just to see where you stand when it comes to logic models. Yes, by now we are all pretty familiar with the term logic model, and for some of us, we can create them in our sleep.
Now that you've completed your quiz, we hope the CQI episode will help you understand why you scored yourself the way you did. If you still have questions about logic models after this program, please reach out to us, and together we can help resolve your questions about your logic model.
For those of you who may be curious about how the national, state, and local logic models fit together, and what is that overall plan, we're about to discuss just that. And hopefully by the end of today's episode, you will be able to see the linkages and not need a banner-sized paper to present your logic model. Back in 2007, a group of CDC and RPE folk created the national logic model you are seeing here for creating safe communities through rape prevention education.
I was so impressed when I pulled this logic model out of my files and saw how accurate it was in depicting what we are doing with the RPE projects, both in Ohio and across the United States. As you can see, this logic model created the vision that drives the RPE program.
Since 2007, some of our thinking and language has changed. We would use the word equity now, but the overall concept of what we are doing remains the same.
In this episode, we're going to hone in on the pieces and parts that are specific to Ohio. We want to present how Ohio is linked to the national model, and ultimately, how your logic model components fit into Ohio's. Having an understanding of how everything is linked, at least for me, helps inform creating a logic model.
If you notice in the far left, in the blue, you have the community readiness component of engaging in sexual violence prevention. This component is what we have called in the past capacity building and coalition building, and now we are expanding to the term community mobilization. In the bottom of the blue column, you have the various levels of readiness that can be used to determine activities to match and build readiness for community mobilization.
Some of you may recall when Dr. Wasco presented on the readiness scale. That scale may be helpful for you to revisit as it has relevance to community readiness for coalition building as well as evaluation. But lest I regress, let's look at the turquoise column, which lists the activities that can be implemented based on community readiness and the various levels of the social ecological model where the community determines prevention work can be done to achieve the community outcomes.
And the yellow boxes or columns are about the outcomes that CDC stated would be achieved with the RPE funding. Those include short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes that would eventually lead to preventing sexual violence in the United States.
So we read from left to right, and these are the if-then statements that drive our logic model development. The box at the bottom is our ultimate impact or overarching goal, that is the prevention of sexual violence perpetration and the promotion of safety, equality, and respect.
If you look carefully at the National Logic Model, you will see that it includes an outcome: reforms to eliminate health disparities, social inequities, and to increase community justice and accountability regarding sexual violence.
There continues to be increased attention to and understanding of this work, both nationally and within our state. This illustration reminds us of our evolving understanding of movement, from addressing disparities to removing barriers for all people.
Our understanding of how to address these topics continue to grow. We are now increasing the attention to community involvement, which helps ensures full representation of all those impacted as we plan the change we are seeking to accomplish. An example of this, the increasing attention to youth leadership and centering the voices of youth.
Now is the time to take a quick pause and talk about changes in terminology.
Again, the National Logic Model was written in 2007, and since then, we have learned more and adapted our terminology a bit.
So as you recall in episode 2, we talked about the PPPs, or 3Ps, as some of you all like to refer to them. Within the STOP SV technical package, you may see a variety of terminology that we are trying to standardize. The 4 categories you see on this slide we are calling methods. You will notice some of the terminology shift between the versions of the logic models that we are sharing. As you can see in the turquoise box that is outlined in red, we have the 3 strategies that CDC is supporting Ohio to implement. Ohio RPE funding does not fund hotline operations. We have recently added community mobilization as outer level work, which also gets reported as a PPP to CDC. That work is more related to the first true blue column on this logic model.
Here, we zoom in on those 3 strategies from the STOP SV technical package that we are focusing on here in Ohio. The terminology for these strategies used in STOP SV is on the left.
To show how the national, state, and local logic models align, we will follow through each of them using the example that starts here. The national logic model as public organizational policy advocacy, which aligns to what we are calling create protective environments, and includes both policy efforts and focuses on the physical environment.
Let's take a look at the Ohio RPE logic model and see how we built ours out from the national model we just looked at.
This brightly colored graphic is Ohio's RPE logic model for 2019 through 2023. That we submitted to CDC for our most recent funding opportunity. CDC prescribed, through providing a template, how we were to complete this logic model.
As you all can see, Ohio's logic model is pretty detailed and still includes all of the components of the national model with more specificity. Beth, can you explain the different colored boxes and how someone should read this logic model?
Sure, Sandra. Let's move through this logic model from left to right, and we'll zoom in on some of the specific parts in the next slide. Starting with the deep purple, basically it says Ohio makes program selections that are based on evidence-based and data-driven, and we are including evaluation in all our steps. Moving to the blue box, this identifies the levels of the social ecological model we are working on. Next, the green boxes. These boxes show the PPPs. Locally funded RPE programs have been selected related to these strategies. The last 3 columns or boxes are devoted to outcome evaluation, short-term, intermediate, and long-term.
So Beth, what do the arrows and dotted lines mean? I'm a little confused.
The arrows show pathways and relationships between the different strategies and how they will be evaluated. The dotted lines show the relationships between building the prevention capacity or training of youth leaders, adults who work with youth, and youth in general. Ultimately, our plan is that youth leaders are training other youth in prevention.
Although it may seem complicated, we are pretty much breaking down our logic model a little more than the national model, and we added the specific risk and protective factors that we all agreed on at our statewide meeting a couple of years ago.
The other thing you'll notice about the Ohio Logic Model is that we separated out the short, intermediate, and long-term outcomes, so it would keep those if-then statements pretty clear between what we intend to accomplish. The other thing that separating out the outcomes does is make it more realistic for us to say we are working on achieving these outcomes, but it may take longer due to various delays, challenges, and context changes.
COVID is one of those setbacks. That happened that we would have never anticipated when we developed our logic model.
Yes, that's right, Beth. And you will see once we get to the local logic models that we included a space for those types of external factors that may impact implementing your PPPs and getting to your outcomes. Let's take one section of the logic model and show how we can connect the national and state logic models to some of the work our local partners are doing.
Good idea, Sandra. You can see that we have outlined in red the strategies from Stop SV on this version of the logic model, which align with the ones that we looked at from the national logic model on the last slide.
So to recap, we have create protective environments, provide opportunities to empower and support girls and women, promote social norms that protect against violence, and teach skills to prevent sexual violence.
You see the national and state logic models for the same strategy side by side on this slide. On the Ohio Logic Model pullout on the right, we list some of the efforts that our local partners are implementing. Using this example of the method, create protective environments, PPPs being implemented by local programs include Safe Bars, which is being implemented by Women Helping Women, and Green Dot, which is being implemented by Compass and Ohio Health.
As we have previously discussed in earlier CQI episodes, there is some shifting in the terms that we're using here in the green box. First, CDC is using the term strategy. Now we're going to start using the term methods instead of strategy. The second language change you will notice is the PPPs, which stands for programs, policies, and practices, the actual things that you are implementing. Later in this episode, we will be going into more detail about your own community logic models. This slide shows the way that the national, state, and local logic models align, using the example of creating protective environments.
So if you read across, what we have here is on the left, the CDC logic model, and we are honing in on policy, organizational policy advocacy, which aligns with Ohio's logic model, method, create protective environments, school and workplace organizational policy. And at the local level, the PPP in support of that method is to implement an environmental scan of parents to determine school climate policy. Take some time to look at your own logic model and where it aligns with what is in the state and national logic models.
We will talk more about your local logic models and how to improve them once we get through our section of why logic models are important and how best to use them.
As we pause to reflect on the value of logic models, Let's think about why they are important and how we can use them beyond fulfilling our RPE requirement.